We are pleased to welcome our next speaker, Mary Shirley, a qualified lawyer with extensive experience in global ethics and compliance. Currently, she is the head of Culture of Integrity and Compliance Education at Fresenius Medical Care in Boston. Mary co-hosts the Great Women in Compliance podcast and is also the co-author of the book Sending the Elevator Back Down: What We've Learned from Great Women in Compliance. She is of the opinion that, as co-host of the Great Women in Compliance podcast, I have interviewed many successful women in the field. The common threads that tie them are as follows: to be great, give to get, have humility, celebrate your unique strengths, and go where you are valued. You deserve nothing less, and life is too short to accept anything less.
Hi, Mary. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Tanya. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Great. Thank you.
So, first question, what motivated you to start the Great Women in Compliance podcast?
The story originates in 2018 when my co-host Lisa Fine and I were attending Great Women in Compliance. CEI, which is a conference for compliance professionals. And we were chatting with a number of people in the industry and realized that the voice of women seemed to be missing when it came to compliance podcasts. And so that very night, as we discussed, that the idea of the Great Women in Compliance podcast was born, and we produced a podcast, the first one in the series, a couple of months later in December 2018.
So how many interviews have you had so far?
We are about 122, I think.
Wow.
So over the last, coming up to 3 years now, we moved fairly quickly to weekly podcasts and celebrated our 100th episode earlier this year.
What a fantastic contribution. That's a big amount. So you've interviewed many women in the field over the last few years. What is it, would you say, that makes someone a great woman in compliance?
Well, we named our book Sending the Elevator Back Down, and the reason for that is because it was such a common thread for the women that we interview. So women who are very accomplished in compliance are incredibly busy. They juggle a number of portfolios, and that's both within the community, compliance in terms of their jobs, but maybe compliance as an interest or hobby outside of work as well, amongst all the other things that they do. Many are parents or look after their own parents and have a lot of commitments. But despite that, they manage to find time to pay it forward, to mentor and trailblaze so that there is a path left behind for others. So sending the elevator back down is one of the most common threads that we've seen. They also tend to be lifelong learners. So what I've noticed is that even veterans in the field who are incredibly experienced in compliance, they are open to learning. And so we have a number of experienced people who listen to the podcast and they remain open to learning more from others. And finally, they know their worth. They are women who understand that inherently they have power, they command a great deal of respect, and when that is not being served, they leave the table and go to a place where they will find it.
Okay, you talk about allyship, which is a lifelong process of building relationships based on trust and consistency and accountability with individuals or also with groups of people. What have you observed about the allyship of men in compliance?
So we've also interviewed a number of men in compliance for the podcast, and the reason for that is that while the aim of the podcast is to empower and advance the field, amplify their voices, we know that the conversation of the advancement of women cannot be done without our male allies listening, contributing, and frankly helping us. It would just be impossible for women to lead this charge on their own. And men are a very big part of our working community, and they are in a great position to assist. So what we've seen is that the compliance field is very, very fortunate to have a number of wonderful male allies. An example of something I've seen recently is a gentleman by the name of Kevin Within, who's based in the UK. Kevin is going to be speaking on a panel at a conference, and he wanted to make sure that it wasn't what you call a manel, which is, just a row of men espousing their opinions. And so he reached out to see if there were any women to recommend to join that speaking session, and also posted within our LinkedIn community so that there would be diversity within that particular session. So thank you so much to all the men in compliance who raise and support the women that are working alongside you.
Wonderful. So Mary, what else is there to do before there's a level playing field and gender parity in compliance?
There's a bit more to be done. We've seen some great advancements, and there are certainly some positives in compliance, which I'll move on to in a little more detail in my presentation. But what is seemingly the case from the data is that women do trail behind men a bit in terms of salary and compensation packages. One of the positives, though, is that we do have great representation of women in the field. We are not a male-dominated discipline, and that is also at the higher levels. So Chief Compliance Officer, Executive Compliance positions, there are a large number of women who also serve as role models for the women following after them.
Great, and now I look forward to your presentation, Breaking the Glass Ceiling. The stage is yours, Mary.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tanya, and thank you everyone for joining today. I'm very pleased to be here, and it sounds like you've had an amazing conference so far, and today I'm sure is going to be spectacular with the lineup to follow. So taking a look now at breaking the glass ceiling, what more is there to be done? What does the state of affairs look like? Well, I took a look at some salary surveys to check on what is happening for women in comparison to our gentlemen counterparts in the field. Compliance Week data, they are holding an Inside the Mind of the Chief Compliance Officer survey right at this moment. So for current data, watch this space for this year's information. But going back to the data that we currently have access to, it shows that men in compliance are making an average of 5% more than women. So not huge, but why shouldn't it be equal? So a little bit of a gap there for us to work on. And as I mentioned, we do have a lot of female representation in compliance, which is fantastic because it means that women are in a position to help those who are looking for inspiration, be mentors, be sponsors, and even at the senior levels. What we often see in other industries is that men tend to take over more of the senior level roles, but very, very fortunately in compliance, we're seeing more of an equal distribution of that. And so Barker Gilmore salary survey had representation of almost 50-50. Inside the Mind of the Chief Compliance Officer was showing that participants were over half were women. What is perhaps unsurprising, if you've ever wondered whether getting a law degree would be helpful for you in terms of being a compliance officer, I think we see now and again that some hiring managers are particularly biased when it comes to hiring for lawyers. And interestingly, if we were to put this into dollars, we also see that legal education tends to command a higher salary. So if you're in that position where right now you're wondering, should I or shouldn't I study law? The numbers indicate that it could be to your benefit, though I would say there are certain places where getting a law degree is incredibly expensive. So you're going to want to understand whether it's going to be worth it in terms of that investment, not only in dollars, but in terms of your time and your interest levels. Moving along now to the Barker-Gilmore survey, which I think is quite useful just in terms of a visual representation here. You can see in the grey are the women's figures for compensation packages broken down into the components, and in the sort of burgundy crimson colour are our gentlemen colleagues. You can see that it's pretty close, especially when it comes to base salary. Where men start edging out women in the field is bonus. So, ladies, think about bonus when you are working on your salary negotiations for your next job. Looks like there's opportunity for us there. Again, the long-term incentive plan, for those of you unfamiliar, long-term incentive plans are typically more likely to be offered at the senior levels. So if you're newer to compliance, do not panic. Necessarily, if you don't have a long-term incentive plan, it may not be offered until later on in your career in your company. But we can see again, men are awarded higher valued long-term incentive packages, and you can see that these little edging outs in every individual component. When we look at total compensation, there is a not insignificant difference there. So based on that, and under the assumption that we don't want to be in this position, that we're looking to a brighter future, what is it that can be done? So the first thing I would say is, when you are a hiring manager or an employer for compliance positions, do not require candidates to provide you with their current or last drawn salary. And the reason for this is that studies show that this almost vicious cycle of, asking someone what their salary is and then just offering them slightly more, this disproportionately harms women and minorities. So if you're looking for improvement, don't do this. Additionally, this asking the question of what is your current salary is actually illegal in some jurisdictions. So the alternative question that I would suggest is asking for candidates to provide you with their target salary. What are they looking for? Because it doesn't give you any information less than what you would have asked for their current salary. People want to move on for a reason, so they don't want to earn the same thing over again or just marginally more. Pay them what they're worth. Like me bias is a bias that shows, which I feel is quite a human tendency. When you meet someone and you find that you have so many things in common and the conversation basically goes, I like to do this. Oh, me too. And so you have this back and forth of finding out all these commonalities between you. It's human nature that we are drawn to other people that are like ourselves. However, like me bias is an absolute killer for diversity in the workplace. And it's not helpful or productive to have a whole series of mini-me echo chambers going on. If you are the manager and you say that you want to do something in a certain way and no one challenges you and it's not a great idea, or there might be an interesting spin to put on it, that's not great for your compliance program. So next time you're in a conversation with candidates, ask yourself, am I falling into the like me bias trap? The question to redirect yourself to really is, who is the best person for the job? And the answer to that question is probably not going to be mini-me. The next thing I'd ask you to consider is joining your company's women's employee resource group, if you have one, as an ally, if you're a gentleman, and hear about current challenges for women, learn about them, and offer yourself as a mentor. I know one of my colleagues was assigned a gentleman mentor within the company that I work for, Fresenius, and she found it to be of immense value, really enjoyed it, and it was such a successful mentoring relationship. And proactively offer yourself as a mentor. Whether or not there's an employee resource group within your company, look for promising female talent within and outside of your company that you can offer your time to. It needn't be that much. Even one hour session a month will really help to get someone on track, provide inspiration and motivation, and you might even be able to be a sponsor as well. The difference between a mentor and a sponsor. So mentors are able to help you navigate things like workplace politics, offer advice, coach you. Sponsors are critical in that they help open doors for you. They are able to provide you with opportunities. And in an ideal world, we'd love to be surrounded by both mentors and sponsors. What about great women in compliance? So the thing with going into any transaction is that you want to be well informed, know your worth, find out what that might be by discussing with recruiters. Don't discuss it with regulators and authorities, your career steps, they're not interested. With recruiters, ask them what they think your market rate would be, what kind of target salary you would be going for. And I would recommend having this discussion even if you're not openly or actively looking for a role at the time. If a recruiter contacts you with a role and you're not interested, do have that conversation. Remember, you want to build your network before you need it. And so when you're not actively looking for a job, that is the perfect time to work on your relationships. Look at benchmarking surveys. I've discussed one of them already. Have open conversations with your contacts. In many cultures, it's considered a little bit crass to discuss money, and even more so to talk about our salaries with our friends. But you know what? It's actually a really valuable exercise. I had a conversation recently with a couple of my peers, and it was really interesting to understand, based on our levels of experience and the type of profiles that we have, whether our salaries were aligned, and if not, was there a good reason for it? Knowledge is power. Keep that in mind. And ask companies for salary bands. What we saw in what we can see in the studies and the surveys, larger companies offer higher salaries, perhaps not surprising, but good to be confirmed. Healthcare, life sciences, and technology companies do tend to pay well in compliance. Note that financial and professional services are less so. So I'm not saying never work for a bank or never work for a big four company. There are going to be, individual situations. I'm just talking about trends here to keep in mind. And so use this information when you're negotiating. Interestingly, studies show that the majority of hiring managers do expect candidates to negotiate on the first offer. So I would say don't be scared to do so. A lot of people worry that if they get an offer and they start to negotiate on it, they look to be so high maintenance and difficult that the offer is going to be withdrawn and they lose the opportunity. That very rarely, if at all, happens. When the company chooses to give you an offer, it means they want you. They're working with you to come to a resolution about getting the employment agreement signed, whatever it is in your country. And in fact, one study that I looked at showed that 70% of managers expect candidates to negotiate. And another study showed that 56% of people do not negotiate when they get an offer. So there's a difference, meaning that there is opportunity there. If you get an offer, there's a good chance that the person on the other side is expecting it. And even if they're not expecting it, there's a good chance that it will not harm you. It's not a guarantee. Nothing is ever guaranteed in life, but I will say that I always expect team members coming in to negotiate. And I had a very memorable conversation with a former boss of mine. And I said, after I'd been hired about 6 months later, was it annoying for you when I was negotiating throughout the offer process? And he smiled at me and said, Mary, I would have respected you less if you hadn't. So think about that. We in compliance are expected to have a backbone. We're expected to be assertive in terms of our role. How can we best protect our companies, best advocate for compliance, if we ourselves cannot speak up for our own needs and advocate for our own benefits? It is a plus to have a backbone in compliance. Have the confidence. So that's the high level information for you. We generally give some deep dive conversations on the podcast. So if you're interested in learning more or seeing the profiles of great women in compliance, I invite you to join up to our podcast. If the discussion today has been of interest to you and you're curious about some of the studies that I mentioned, I've got a slide here at the back which talks about or references the Barker-Gilmore compensation report, as well as the Compliance Week inside the mind of the CCO, that specifically the compensation information was put into this article here. But look out for the next inside of the mind of the CCO study, because it'll be coming out in a few months, I anticipate, and is full of more information. In terms of benchmarking reports, the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics has specific compensation data, as well as Barker-Gilmore. So if you're looking to get a couple of pieces of information, both of those should be good starting points for you. With that, I come to the end of the substantive prepared presentation here, and I will check back in with Tanya as to whether there's anything else to discuss on my side or whether we're moving on to the next session.
Mary, thank you so much for your presentation and also for your inspiration to the compliance community.